Any short, quick comments that they would like to make just before we get into the grab bag of the questions? Okay, Brad.
I just wanted to follow up on Lynne's comment because I'm not sure I got a chance, as I was rushing toward the end of my talk, to drive the point home about, because I talked about what the whales are feeding on at different places in that last slide before I showed the animation of L87. I showed a number of the prey samples we collect on the outer coast. And like I say, we've got 23 some samples, which is a very small sample size, but what was really interesting was that we had a smattering of stocks from all up and down the west coast. We had the Central Valley was in there, the Klamath River, several from the Columbia, as well as Puget Sound. And if you take a look at the analyses that John Ford had initially done, looking at whale populations relative to salmon stocks back in the 90s. This was followed on by Eric Ward's analyses in 2011, as well as his more recent analyses that were done for the workshop. It just, as Lynne pointed out, there is no one stock. It is really broad-based, and that's, I think, what everybody really needs to keep in mind here, is that we're talking about an entire west coast of the U.S., as well as the Fraser River watershed in British Columbia.
Great. So, okay. First question. And the comment, which is a great true thing, there are a lot of whale-watching naturalists in the audience today, and they are really our interface with a whole lot of people, all summer long, a lot of people on boats. So what one action, and this is a hard one that we all get all the time, what one action or lifestyle change would you recommend to our passengers? People ask them, I'm sure, that will help the whales and salmon, keeping in mind that many don't live in the Salish Sea watershed. So what would you recommend that naturalists tell people when people ask them, what can I do to help? Anything? Rich?
Don't eat farmed salmon.
So if given one wish, I would ask for more wishes. So given one message, I guess I would say learn more to inform everything that you do as a consumer, as a voter, as a person on our planet. So learning more and sharing that information with your friends and family.
All right, great.
I think about linkages. I think this is where a lot of people have trouble understanding how their actions may actually ultimately affect things. There's this ripple effect that goes on, and it's, I think, very challenging for people to understand how their everyday activities, what those things might in fact affect down the road as far as habitat destruction, and any of our activities may seem completely innocent, but they may have drastic effects either now or down the road.
So look downstream.
Yeah.
Joseph?
Yeah, I'll make a quick comment, and that is, it reminds me also of the paperwork that was put together for this program. On the back sheet, I think it talks to you about things that you could do. I think it's a great list, but one thing that could be added is join and support the organizations that are bringing people together, collaborating with other groups, and engaging in policy making and basically politics. Lynne, the point you were making, or I'm sorry, it was your point about where's the political will, and we've got to demonstrate that the political will is here to support the changes that we need to make. And so I would just encourage people to organize with other people and make sure our collective voices are heard.
Jeanette?
I'm going to alter the question slightly too. If there's someone on that boat that lives in a salmon watershed on the West Coast, I would tell them, learn about the watershed that you live in, plant more trees and native plants on your property, and if you have storm water that's running off your property, install a rain garden.
Great. Okay. Jim?
The one thing that I would recommend, and I think it's something that has to be done by everybody to bring about recovery, and that is the average citizen just has to pay a lot more attention to what's going on. You have to pay attention to what you're eating. You have to pay attention to what your politicians are doing. There's a lot going on that, particularly recently with a lot of this coal and oil and the attempt to industrialize the lower Columbia River by some of the politicians, which could negate a lot of what's happening in the upper river to produce more fish. But a well-informed citizenry that pays attention and then acts on what they see, I think would go a long way.
Okay, now this comes down to more in the realm of data. How much bycatch of Chinook are taken by the purse seiners along the west side of the San Juan? Does anyone know how much bycatch gets picked up? Anyone want to comment on that? Any anecdotal indications?
Less than about 6,000 or 7,000 fish
All right.
in that whole fishing area. I think it's area 7A. So in earlier biological opinions, looking at the Puget Sound fisheries, we've worked with the state and the tribes to put some limits on that. And so there are some stepwise approaches. So those fisheries are not targeting Chinook. They are targeting pink and sockeye salmon, and Chinook are the bycatch. So there are some steps that if they get close to that limit, then the tribes are retaining those fish for their own purposes, and it's not for sale, it's not commercial at some point. And then there is a cap, about 6,000 or 7,000 fish.
Okay, great. This, I think, is to Jim. You said the fisheries was comfortable with the status quo and we need to push them to change. What are several things you would like them to do differently?
Well, first off, I think I would like to see them recognize that they have the bully pulpit on habitat issues for salmon, and quit not protecting salmon habitat because the Forest Service manages the forest and the BLM manages the grazing areas and the Water Department manages the water and DEQ manages some of that fragmented approach to watershed management has allowed the management agencies to basically say, well, you know, habitat belongs to somebody else. And I've heard that over and over again. They should use the bully pulpit to point out where habitat problems are taking place. I would also say that real hatchery reform is needed. In the last 40 years, I've been aware of and actually participated in a couple of them, but there's been at least 3 or 4 attempts at hatchery reform, and none of them have really made much of an impact. And it's going to take a really strong effort to take a lot of really good work that's already been done and make sure that it gets implemented. That's two things. That's two.
Anybody else? Okay, and this is a specific policy question. Is it plausible to vary the fishing quotas with regard to the PDO, the Pacific Decadal Oscillation in ocean water conditions? Can the fishing quotas be pegged to what the ocean conditions are? Is that a policy that can be instituted? Does anyone know?
Usually it's after the fact.
Yeah, after the fact. Okay. Is there any commercial fishing allowed on Chinook in the Salish Sea? And do we need to stop all fishing on Chinook?
So I'm not the right person from NOAA to answer some of these questions, and I can bring these questions back to my colleagues that are the experts in fishery management. We do work very closely with them to look at how that fishery management does affect the whales through this science panel process. One of the things we've struggled with is that cause and effect relationship between actions that are, reductions in salmon abundance and mortality and low reproduction in the whales. I don't think that the result of that panel process was a conclusion that all salmon fishing or all Chinook fishing needs to stop. That was not the conclusion.
Okay.
One thing, I'd like to comment on it just a little bit. To basically try to shut down the entire fishing of Chinook salmon in the North Pacific Ocean would first of all be very difficult. But the other thing is it's not respecting the people that have been using that fish respectfully for generations. And if you want to have the tribes on your side, don't ever talk about shutting down the entire fishery, because it's very important for them, and you just can't do that.
Yeah. Jeanette?
Yeah. It does seem like a simple answer. Why don't we just stop fishing? But I think, as someone mentioned before, the salmon aren't all sort of separate in little separate places. They're all mixed in together. And it, as Rich mentioned, it is a really important cultural thing for the tribes. It's also very important for their economy. There also are other people that are non-tribal that really depend on the fisheries. The fisheries are focused on the healthy populations of salmon and hatchery populations of salmon. Any of the listed species of salmon that end up getting caught are sort of what Lynne was talking about before, the bycatch. And so there is a very intensive fisheries management negotiation every year that happens before the fishing season begins, where the state and the tribes and then NOAA all negotiate together about what the forecasts are for the different populations, what the chances are of that kind of bycatch, and they very tightly regulate that. So they all agree ahead of time what's acceptable, and then they monitor it during the fishing season to try and make sure that they hit that target. And if there was something wrong with the forecast and they're going beyond what they had agreed to, then it gets shut down. We have tribes in the Puget Sound that haven't been able to fish for many, many years because they don't have hatchery populations, and the populations that they did fish on are listed. And so I know we have a member of the Lummi tribe who participates in our Puget Sound Salmon Recovery Council, and he is just distraught because it has been so long since he has been able to take his kids fishing, and they have a whole generation of their people who have not had the opportunity to practice that cultural way of life, and that is central to their identity as a tribal people. And so they actually now in Lummi are experimenting with something really exciting, which is they're experimenting with a new selective fishing technique, which allows them to fish for the fish that are not the listed, that are not threatened, so that they can actually get out on the water, but they don't have to impact the fish that we do need to get upriver and spawn to restore the natural population. So it's really easy to look at one particular of the H's. I think Ken talked about the H's at the beginning, but it really is, we have to look at the whole picture. And we're doing a lot to manage harvest. There's a lot of good information on hatchery reform. There's more we need to do on hatchery reform, but hatcheries don't need to go away. We just need to manage them better. And there's a lot we need to do for habitat. And so we really need to look at the whole picture and how we're integrating all of that if we're going to be successful.
Great. Ken? Well, you look like you...
Most of what, already got said, thank goodness. But, well, I've been curious about where is some of the data. I was focusing on numbers a little bit, on the numbers of fish caught in various river systems, different methods. And I've been unable to find some of the, in fact, a lot of the treaty fishing data. It just, is that around?
It's integrated in with the state data.
So if you look online on the Washington Department of Fish and Wildlife, they've just created a new database. It's called SCORE,
Yeah.
where they're trying to take the data that they get from the tribes and from the state fishery information and make it available to the public. They just launched it about a year and a half ago or 2 years ago. So it still has some more work, but that's a place that you could look to get some of that information. But I would say one of the things that we recognize in the salmon recovery world that we're struggling with is we need better systems to collect information about what's going on with salmon and to report on that information. And if you go to ask for more money for monitoring, do you know how exciting that is to people? It's not an exciting thing to fund. We get lots of money thrown at us, actually not lots of money, but we get some money thrown at us to do the restoration projects. Nobody's excited about giving us some more funding to collect the critical information we know to track whether or not we're actually moving in the direction we need to move. So that would be another thing that people could do, is support more funding for good monitoring programs and data reporting systems.
Yeah, well, I'm familiar with that one. Yeah. But, yeah, I lost my, what I was, you know, I've seen, well, just this past summer, there were First Nation test fisheries on the west side of San Juan. But that data was not in any of my graphs. I can't find it historically or currently. And my point is really that I think that the first users of this resource are the whales. I mean, if you had a rights issue here, that's the first issue. And then the whales seem to have, over their evolution and the salmon's evolution, figured out that the fish have rights to live too, and a certain number get to the river, and the ecosystem has its needs and so on. And that is that level that I say somewhere 3.5 to 5.5, 6 million, which is the escapement plus in-river harvests, which are easier to manage and they're terminally managed, and the needs of the whales, which are the first users, you know. So somewhere the management has to have a goal of a pretty high level of production of these fish, and the best way to do it is the natural way, I think. The factory fish are not proving to be a solution, although I understand if a hatchery is built and people are making an economy based on the fish caught from that, and even if it's sort of not doing as well as a wild economy might do, they're vested in it. They keep going. You know, they're going to be wanting to continue. But put the first users on you know, a priority list. They fish out front anyway. They're going to get as many fish as they can to, you know, when you're talking about commercial fishing, it's who's fishing out front is a big discussion. And the terminal fisheries that humans do at the rivers or very near the river entrance are they're easily managed in terms of, you know, rather than trying to mix fisheries. That's what we're dealing with in a lot of the purse seining kind of thing, is that, well, they're catching sockeye and they legally catch sockeye, but, oh shit, sorry about this 500 Chinook that we just caught. You know, and Chinook were having a problem, but they had a fishery anyway. So maybe that fishery should be moved more toward the terminal area where it's more controllable. You know, just some really, I'm sure that these guys that have had careers in fish management think about this stuff a lot, but they also have all these pressures on them that modern industrialized society has brought them. You
Brad?
Yeah, I just wanted to follow up on Lynne's comment on the panel report and on Ken's comment about, the incidental take and whatnot. And the main thing is just that, there is you have to consider the spatial temporal overlap of whales and the fisheries. Most of the fisheries operate in the summer, so it's those stocks there. So there are a lot of other fisheries for Chinook that can occur that are not going to have an adverse impact on southern resident killer whales because they're occurring in other areas. Because again, most of these salmon fisheries occur in the summer and the fall. Keep in mind that some of the stocks, vary. One of the things I didn't get a chance to talk about was that spring stocks on the Fraser River have been in trouble for about 10 years. DFO recently had a panel review of this. The report's not out yet. I've been trying to get it for 6 months to see what exactly is going on. But we've seen a change in behavior in terms of the occurrence of the whales and probably in response to that here in the recent past. But we're still talking about, in the fall, the runs returning to the Harrison River, which are actually supplemented by hatchery fish, are actually some of the strongest runs on the Fraser River. This last year we had a collapse on some of their summer stocks, but it's the spring stocks that have been mostly in trouble. But we're talking about several hundreds of thousands of fish, and getting back to what one of the things that Ken had talked about, the number of fish that the whales require. Some of these stocks in the Fraser, particularly in the spring, because of the levels that they're at, may be low enough that the whales are taking a significant portion. So anytime, trying to make a blanket, let's just go close down fishing, I think that it's something to be cautionary about because there's a lot of details that need to be looked at.
Okay, well, here's one, more of a practical thing, and Rich, you already brought this up. How do fish farms harm wild salmon? I'm sure people ask, we tell them don't eat farm salmon, okay? I think we need to explain in a few bullet point outline points to make how do fish farms harm wild salmon? Anybody?
I guess I got stuck with that.
Well, the main issue, what I would say is we should check out Alex Morton.
Yeah. Hey, Rich, will you explain the difference between a fish farm and a hatchery?
Yeah, a hatchery is using Pacific salmon that can be raised, let's have Jim do the hatchery part. But it's basically, you're just taking them, he did a great job of describing, you're taking them out of the system and industrially pushing them through faster. But it's the same fish that you have out there. All the salmon farms are done with Atlantic salmon, which doesn't even belong here. And it's been domesticated so far now in terms of the kind of fish it is that they can't even reproduce in the wild out here, basically. They can get out and spread diseases around. They escape from their salmon farms that are sitting right along the pathways that all the other salmon are migrating. And disease is probably the biggest issue that we have to face with Atlantic salmon and with fish farms. If they did them all on shore with no interaction into the fresh water out here, it might be okay. But it's too expensive. It doesn't end up being it's cost effective. The other thing is in order to feed the Atlantic salmon, you have to basically mine the ocean's food resources to feed them. So you have to fish first, then you take it out, turn it into fish food, and then give it to the Atlantic salmon. So the amount of food that you're getting out of the ocean is being diminished by producing this kind of fish that we think we have to have. Anybody else want to add to that?
Yeah, and parasites and the antibiotics get introduced as well.
Oh yeah, antibiotics, yeah, sure, because if you're raising fish in an enclosed thing, you have to keep them from low disease. So it's the wrong way to do it. Wild salmon are perfectly capable of feeding everything we need if we just give them open rivers.
We don't have the same.
Underneath the farms, the dead zone.
Yeah, dead zone from dead, all the food and stuff dropping down. It's just nasty.
These salmon farms are feedlots, ways of raising salmon. And when you drive by a cattle feedlot or a pork feedlot and you smell what's coming off of it and you know all the things about the secondary effects of it on water quality and the nearby streams and what have you. Just imagine when you see these salmon farms, which are really sort of, they leave you the impression that they're out in these pristine waters and everything is quiet and nice and clean, but basically they're feedlots. And they have all the problems that feedlots have. I don't eat feedlot cattle, I don't eat feedlot fish either.
Here's a number question. Any idea of the number of transient whales on the coastal system? What's the latest estimate of?
Okay, I just went to a meeting that had, there was a meeting on this just in Canada a while back, 250, how's that?
250. There it is, 250. There's a number.
Well, it depends on how you.
Yeah, where, I mean, that's the, it's some,
354.
okay, 354.
Let me elaborate on the question a little bit that I'm kind of trying to grapple with. And what is your sense of the discrete populations? There's the CA transients off California. There's Alaskan, maybe Prince of Wales, or another population in Alaska. Are they separate, or do they mix and mingle, do you think? Are they all one big population that, there are certain range preferences by certain groups within the big, long population, but they generally can mix and mingle and interbreed?
It's a really good question, because I think the DFO already sort of recognizes the California transients being separate from the BC transients. In the U.S., we consider all transients to be, all those groups to be West Coast transients. We are actually going to probably consider it as a case study for a stock identification project we've got coming up within the agency. Based on some of the satellite tagging that we've done on transients in the past few years, I have a hunch that I think that there are some, although they do overlap and are sometimes occur together, I think that there are, some animals that tend to be these more coastal California animals, whereas the BC animals I think are probably more inland. That's my sense from the data we looked at so far. And I'm a little apprehensive about going too far on a limb, because the number of tags we've deployed on transients and their coasts is relatively limited. So I'd like to see a bigger sample size before I go too far out on that limb and start sawing.
Yeah, I can just add a little bit on that. We had about 117 different transients that the Center for Whale Research saw this past year. They were really amazing.
Yeah.
Are there any hybrids?
No hybrids. And the 250 number is the number that over the whole time period that you're likely to possibly see in this inshore habitat. And that's where this coastal, there are some that are never in here that we've seen yet. And that is the coastal bunch, so there's possibly, 354.
We're really basically almost out of time, but here's a good one that goes to ecosystem that I think is important for people to know about, and that is, what are the issues or concerns for the food sources for salmon that they need in terms of their forage fish, bait fish, how are they doing and what can we do about it? Because, they have to have their food to be food. Anybody want to talk about salmon food?
I'll start.
Oh, good.
People can add. So one of the things about forage fish, it's, we're talking, everything's connected, right? The orcas eat the salmon eat other fish, and they all need to be healthy in order to, have food for each other. And the forage fish, now I'm speaking specifically with Puget Sound because that's what I'm most familiar with, but a lot of them spawn and lay their eggs in the shorelines of Puget Sound. And in many places, the shorelines of Puget Sound are being altered through bulkheads, docks, that kind of thing. And there's loss of that kind of spawning habitat. And there's still research going on how that leads to the decline, but we know that there's an impact there. And so I would say that's one thing for people to be aware of. We are trying to do restoration projects where we're working with folks to remove shoreline armoring. In fact, there is a gigantic project that we were successful in getting funding from the state legislature this last year that's going on right now in Burien. It's one of the largest seawall armoring removal projects in Puget Sound, almost a mile when it's done. And it's really exciting, and it's a beautiful shoreline. But as we are doing that and we're working with people, there are more places where bulkheads are being built or rebuilt because they're declining. And so we need better data on what the difference is, but we believe that there's more shoreline being armored in Puget Sound every year than what we're removing. And so that is an important thing to think about when you think about forage fish. They also need places to spawn and lay their eggs and have habitat, and the eelgrass beds that are offshore that need those healthy beaches to feed the ecosystem that allows for the eelgrass to grow. When you impact that, then the forage fish can't survive in the nearshore Puget Sound, and then there's no forage fish for the Chinook and other salmon to eat.
I think that was a pretty complete picture.
I'll just say
Yes,
quickly,
Joseph.
I agree. The point I wanted to make is, I guess what I want to say is that it's an excellent question, and I think until recently it's been an under-asked question. And it's only in the last, I think, 3 or 4 years where there's been and it's still early, a recognition of the importance of paying attention to what's below the salmon and making sure that we have programs and policies and protect the habitats that make sure that salmon have enough to eat so they can serve orcas.
So when you have a few spare minutes, Google Integrated Ecosystem Assessment, IEA. That's sort of on the science side, the modeling work that's being done to gather information on all levels of the food web and put it all together.
Northwest Fisheries Science.
Northwest Fisheries Science.
The other thing to think about when it comes to food for salmon is ocean acidification. Didn't really want to bring it up, but we might as well.
Let's have a conference.
Yeah, well, simply, it's being looked into right now because there's a potential impact on a lot of the zooplankton that salmon feed on out in the ocean. And they have this calcium stages in their development, and so there's interest and concern in that. But it isn't decided one way or the other yet. They may very well be doing okay under the current increases in ocean acidification, but it is a concern.
Yeah,
So when somebody asked what can we do earlier,
Yes.
I heard Rich earlier mention that we need to be efficient with our efforts. We're throwing lots of money at places with low return on investment. I heard Jim and Joseph talk about being aware of what their politicians think, but I didn't hear anybody say pick up the phone and call. And I was told that a call is worth 8 emails or about 25 pushes of a internet survey,
To the politicians or who?
Yeah, picking up the phone and calling the legislators is crucial. They respond to calls.
Right, okay, thank you, good point, yes.
Those of us that work for government agencies aren't allowed to ask you to do that, but that is an excellent suggestion. I will say, the federal government, one of the very important funds for salmon recovery is the Pacific Coastal Salmon Recovery Fund. It is a huge fight every year for how much funding is going to go into that fund. Currently, Senator Murray just was able to maintain the level that it has been in the past couple of years, which is $65 million. That sounds like a lot of money. I would like to have $65 million for my own disposal, but when you think about $65 million across all the different states in the West Coast that are working on salmon recovery, and the fact that when we did our analysis, when we first wrote our Chinook recovery plan, the estimate is that we would need $120 million a year to implement everything that we identified. It's a drop in the bucket. And one of the reasons is that back in DC, people are asking, why are we still working on salmon? We've been working on them for 10 years or 20 years, aren't you done yet? So hearing from folks that that's something that's important to you, could be very helpful.
Thanks. Okay, Gloria?
We've been talking a lot about conditions. A lot of the mortality happens actually from the eggs that hatch through the small drive down the river. And there's some great work done by Laura. I mentioned Jeanette Dorner, for example, all the various impacts that comes with the stormwater. So I want to address the stormwater issue because I think it's one of the really crucial ones to get the sample back so that the sport can survive. Starting from what comes out of our breaks, what runs on the parking lot, and what happens with all of that water.
Right, yeah, well, polluted stormwater into salmon streams is highly detrimental. It kills a lot of salmon. We are over time, but if anyone has anything they would like to say before we end.
Don't forget to pick up one of these.
Don't forget to pick one of those.
Use the
The
recovery
tables
plan.
are out there, and we will have time. We're not all going to clear out immediately, so people will be at their tables. We'll be up here or somewhere. We can chat for a while before we empty the room. Ken?
I was going to be the typical shit disturber. Me. Nancy Black was just prosecuted and convicted and sentenced for feeding a whale. I think our societies, Indigenous, American, and Canadian, might reflect whether or not we should be prosecuted and sentenced to not feeding whales.
This has been an incredibly experienced, knowledgeable panel. Thank you all for being here and contributing. I think it's been really valuable. And thank you all for coming. Today, we're wrapping up, and we're not going to just skedaddle immediately. You want to head down to the captain with me? We'll be gathered there in the lounge for a little while. And look at that box of important information. Yeah.